So a lot of brands and some were pivoting and reducing their spends going into the back half versus others were doing it differently, right? They were sticking it through, right? So it actually separated the brands who could afford to withstand it and who were continuing to do it, and they probably reap some benefits off of that. Brands who were kind of going against the hypothesis and saying, well, I'm not seeing it, and they kind of gave up, right? They lost a bit of volume there as a potential missed opportunity.
Welcome, everyone. We are super, super excited. Prime Day was a hoot. I know everyone had a 4-day window this time. It's going to be a lot of insights, a lot of things we're going to learn, a lot of things we did learn. And I hope it was wonderful. Everyone's recovered, relaxed, back into the overall set of normal ways of life here. But nonetheless, today we're going to be doing a Prime Day investigation. We're going to go into it, what happened over those 4 days. And thankfully, I brought along two of the rock stars from Trellis with me today. We got Mr. Denis Leclerc, our VP of Data Science, who's going to pop off mute right now. And also we got Mr. Teja Srivastavai, also known as Teja, our head of e-commerce growth. Thank you both for joining me today. This is going to be a lot of fun. How's it going for you guys?
Hey, guys.
Good. How's everybody doing?
Doing all right. Awesome. For everyone along the way, there is comments and whatnot that we'll be able to answer as we go. Please do chime in. Denis, talk to me, man. How was Prime Day for you?
It was exciting. It was obviously everyone was anticipating some changes this year with the 4-day window. We weren't quite sure exactly how it was going to play out, and I think we got some good learnings along the way. By and large, it was a good event all around. I think both for the merchants and obviously and for Amazon always does well on these.
Yeah, I think Amazon will always win, and by proxy, we hopefully do too. Teja, what about you, man? How was Prime Day for you? The 4 days, it's a big difference.
It was, and I think a lot of it was, especially talking to the brands being on the ground, is everyone's asked me, what's going to happen? I was like, to be honest, it's hard to know, right? Given that this is the first Prime Day summer event with 4 days, it was a lot of guesses and assumptions, right? I would assume that the performance would have been double. I would assume that traffic and everything would have been double, but it was hard to play. And so a lot of it was playing it by the ear, reacting day by day versus going in with the plan.
And, it's interesting. I think we're going to get into that here as well. But to your point, like, I think we actually very much, 4 days is I feel like the time of year impacted this as well, right? Like, it was earlier in July than it normally is too. It was an additional 2 days. Like, this is untested waters for, I think, all of us, but also for Amazon in that way.
Let's not forget too, like the macro conditions too were significantly different going into this year's event as well, right? So both brands and the shoppers were challenged with higher costs and obviously the tariffs hanging over everyone's heads. How was that going to affect both the merchant's position, discounting, ad spend, all of those variables, and also the shopper in terms of making their purchase decisions through the window? There was a lot of unknowns going into this one.
I think not only that, but it was also, right, like we said, I'll coming off of July 4th weekend, right? And people spending time with their family, not really looking and doing a lot of the window shopping. So that lead-in period going into Prime was also impacting it, right? Given that this is at the start versus last year was at the tail end, back end. So people had a lot more time to actually figure out what they want and what they don't want so they can plan accordingly.
Yeah, it's all very valid points. Like, I know, being for those that don't know, I live in Toronto, and all the three of us are in Canada. In the same way we celebrate our Canada Day weekend, I'm not sitting at a computer. I'm sitting on my patio. I got a barbecue going, right, and we're spending time with people, right, and so it's an interesting timing to choose right after that 4th of July weekend when people are shopping less, right? And so I think both of you have mentioned at this point as well, but like the macroeconomic trends, a lot of those changes, a lot of those things that have impacted sellers for the last last few months and really over the course of this year really have tailwinds effects along with this coming out of July 4th. And so I don't think anybody had an idea as to, I think we had some expectations and we had some hypotheses, but we didn't really know how it was going to shake out. And let's actually get into this. I know we've all had this discussion coming into Prime Day over what we call our extended boardroom there as well, which is the bar close to us. But we were actually all debating this with everyone in the organization there too. So this is kind of where we got to. This is what we came to expect. Dennis, talk to me about this 2x increase. Was it just like a linear extrapolation here from 2 days to 4 days?
Yeah, I mean, given all of the other uncertainties and questions that we've already just talked about, right? A simplistic kind of starting assumption was, for us at least, was to say, okay, let's just assume that, frankly, that Amazon's hypothesis is correct, and that by doubling the duration of the Prime Day window, should we anticipate 2x the traffic, 2x the volume to come through? And so that was our starting position, recognizing that there would probably be some nuances through that, but it was a good starting point for us.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Right. Like it naturally makes sense. Like there's more days equals more sales equals more traffic equals more and more and more. What about the second one here? Like higher ASPs, lower discounts. What was the hypothesis here? What was our expectation?
So this comes back to some of those macroeconomic considerations that we talked about, right? So we came into this Prime Day with at least a starting assumption that we wouldn't see heavily deeper discounting on the part of the merchant. Why? Because they're faced with much higher costs of importing their goods. They're getting some increased margin pressure as a result of some of those macro trends. And so we kind of expected that either the number of participating brands or the depths of their discounting would be either the same or maybe somewhat less than last year.
Interesting. Yeah, it makes sense too, right? Like if costs are going up and people have been talking about how their costs have gone up since the beginning of this year, we've seen that reflect in pricing as well, and a lot of even our customers on dynamic pricing, right? And what they want to shift their strategies towards of being, let's get that price higher. Let's make sure we're covering our margins here. To that effect, then as well, there's less margins to discounts, right? So logically, it makes a lot of sense, right? There's margins are tighter, prices are are higher already leading into this period. But then how is that going to shake out? Like Teja, this last one here, talking about the shopper and talking about we've seen historically huge demand within that first 12 hours of Prime Day, right? Is that going to be the same? What was the hypothesis there?
I think going into it was it's always going to be there, right? Is no one's really going to pull the trigger in that lead-in period. They're all window shopping, they're all adding to the carts, but they're just waiting for that deal to trigger on, right? It suddenly goes from a 5% deal or a coupon to 20, 25 to even 30%, depending on that extent of brands discounting. And so going in, irrespective of being a 2-day or 4-day Prime, day one was always going to be strong. That was what I was telling all our brands, and like you're still going to see that bump.
Yeah. And so let's click into it. Like what actually happened? I think this is the biggest question everybody has. And what we were even going into it with was that will the additional 2 days drive real value, and or will we just see the same performance shake out over 4 days versus 2? And so as we get into this, I think that's the biggest thing that we want everyone to think about. And I'm sure everyone else thought about this too, but are we getting more across 2 days, or are we getting the same just across 4 days? And I think that's the depth there. But looking at that, and I know we talked about this last year more than anything, was people who participated versus not participated. Did the 4-day window and making it a 4-day tentpole event, did that change anything here? And it doesn't really seem like that. Do you guys have any perspective to share here? Why people didn't really jump in with more days, or why not?
Yeah, go ahead, Teja.
I think regardless of it being 4 days or 2 days, I think it's a matter of people, they want a discount or not, right? At the end of the day, that's the question that they were trying to answer, and is do they have the margins to support it? And to that extent, especially with what we're going in and the hypothesis with all the tariffs and margin struggles that brands were doing, I personally at least had a view that I would expect less people to arguably participate this year, regardless of it being a longer window or shorter window, right? And if it's a longer window, more so, that means those discounts are cumulative over a longer period, which means less bottom line impact as a result as well, right? So I was somewhat surprised that based on my hypothesis being less, but at the same time, I'm not surprised that I think people still need the amount of cash flow that it opens up, right? That top line revenue that you get during that Prime Day is still important for the business.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I guess it kind of keeps the same, right? People didn't really change their strategy is kind of what this tells me, right? Like, yes, there was a 1% increase here. Let's chalk that up to a margin of error, but not moving the needle in terms of increasing participation or not. And the 4 days didn't really change people's perspective as to whether or not they should participate in Prime Day. And that was something that I think even we were curious about. Would people participate more or less? And so nothing.
Just to add one more thing into that, I think the cross section of brands that we tend to look at in these analyses, right? They tend to be those perennial brands that have been around for 3, 4, 5+ years. They're in a rhythm. They're not going to really change their participation rates all that much, despite all of the uncertainties that we talked about earlier. So, not entirely surprising that the levels are both the same.
Yeah, fair enough. And I think the next question then becomes, especially because with the sample size that we look at, or with the sample that we look at here in this basket of brands that all kind of same ones we looked at last year as well, arguably more now as we have more and more brands on the platform. But that strategy though, right? It's I think the key part of what you just mentioned there, Dennis, is what is their strategy for these tentpole events? And as a result, they're strategically not changing much, yes. Right? And that's an draw here.
We saw that have some impact, as we'll talk about a bit later. But yeah, there's
so let's dive into it to that point, right? So last year, this is kind of what we saw across that sample size of brands that participated and the ones we sampled for this as well, right? It's 7% tacos. I'll take that to the bank all day, right? And we see what that selling price is, the conversion rate. When we let's bring in kind of that first hypothesis we had, right? That linear, that 2x kind of growth. Numbers should look like this then, right? About literally 2xing across the board and looking at what our ad spend should be, our sessions. And to note for everyone looking at this as well, we're not looking at we're looking at the individual number of people. Part of the reason we're looking at sessions versus looking at the page views in this regard as well, but trying to see exactly how many you end up creating from there. And so we think there'll be more, right? We think that spend will increase in a similar fashion. And to that effect, I think Dennis mentioned it there too, and Teja did as well. But it's the strategies are staying the same, right? And we're seeing that shake out. And so arguably we'll be able to sell more units, keep very similar ASPs, our total sales will go up, and things will be really good. If this is what shook out over Prime Day, I think everybody would be very, very happy. And the hypothesis towards that. But what actually shook out was something drastically different. I'm gonna throw to you, Dennis, first on this one. Looking at comparing that hypothesis versus that 4-day window that we did see for 2025.
Yeah, I mean, so on the whole, we did see increases, right? If you do just a straight up comparison of that 2-day to 4-day, you do see the increases there, but not nearly to the extent of that kind of that rather simplistic starting point of a quick doubling across the board. But the thing maybe to call out, so the total number of sessions, the total number of units did not double. But if you look at what played out on the ad spend side, again, speaking to that kind of applying the same strategy again and again, it does appear as though the brands, by and large, went in with the assumption that they should be going in planning to double their spend. They did close to double per spend, but the conversions and ultimately the sales and therefore the tacos didn't quite hold up to those levels.
Yeah, and so I put the deltas here between the hypothesis and the 4-day primes, right? So we'll look at the 2-day versus 4-day separately, but if we did see a 2x hypothesis and what actually played out. And so as you can tell, this data is taking my breath away. And so what actually played out here as well, right? There is a big delta to your point, Dennis. Like the ad spend wasn't that far, funny enough, right? People in similar vein, people approaching from the same strategy, they spent almost spent double, right? Not too far away from that. Whereas you see some drops in conversion rate. And Teja, what else are you seeing from this data when we start comparing that hypothesis versus the actual as we continue down here?
I think it's the big thing for me is the traffic, right? I would have assumed more people coming in, given that it's a longer window there, and the fact that it were about 4 million in session counts being lower than the hypothesis, right? That's a big amount. And that could impact your sales, but to a certain extent here, right? When we can see that, right? I've seen about $53 million less in sales relative to that simple hypothesis of seeing that 2x, right? And that in general will overall impact the efficiencies. That will impact your overall strategy, and it kind of goes back to the overarching theme that the strategy wasn't adapted for a 4-day prime, right? And in the sense, this data is telling me that it's a bit of an unknown. We're seeing less traffic, but we're spending somewhat more here, close to what I would expect to spend on a 2x increase in my sales. But the data is telling me it just wasn't there, right? The sales weren't there to support what we're doing. And I think in terms of that, but what's interesting though at the same time is the ASPs, right? Why like lower people coming in, right? More spend, less sales, but every order to a certain extent was slightly higher than what we expected to see and what we saw compared to the 2-day prime as well, right?
Yeah, that was a big call out for me. If we look at it, from the perspective of what would have happened had those ASP increases not played out, right? That would have been a real struggle, I think, for a lot of the brands out there. Frankly, it's a good thing that those ASPs did increase. It helped make up for some of that loss of that loss in traffic that we were talking about.
Yeah. So then would it's if the ASPs went up, which is I think aligned with what we thought from like the tariff pressures and kind of the margin pressures that brands have been facing this year. We are getting, it is a lower conversion rate, but in turn, our total sales did go up. And right, like I think the interesting part here is if we actually look at what the total number of units, like there wasn't that much difference, right? Like that's, we didn't, not a lot more moved in 4 days.
It was interesting that the buyer was willing to buy into those higher ASPs as strongly as they did, actually.
Yeah, like I think that if we, I think buyers are getting smarter towards it. But if I do some rough back of the napkin math here, we would only, if ASP stayed the same, we would be pretty much on par with total sales. No, like maybe a million or two higher. Right. And so I think the rough math here, if I'm going to do this rough math on the fly here, 1.65 total units times 38.66, that puts us at around 63.7 in, 1.69, 1.69 times 38.66. That actually puts us at about 65 million, right? Yeah. So we're really, really close to where we got more sessions, we spent more money, we converted less people, but moved very similar number of units. And in turn, the ASP is what really helped us out a lot with prices being higher.
Absolutely.
Right. And of course, that makes sense in how that translates from a tacos perspective. And so then so hypothesis number one, it was not linear. The extra 2 days didn't really help much outside of, and I say this with the utmost love, Amazon made a bit more money on the ad spend side there as well, right? Right. We all spent a lot more thinking we'd be able to attain a bit more there, but we really didn't get too much. The ASP and the changes made from pricing leading up to this really helped support our increase in total sales. But again, the impact of tacos was paramount. Right. We spent a lot more money thinking we'd be able to get more, and not a lot changed. Buyers weren't there for it. Right. And so it's an interesting perspective. Let's actually look at the 2 days versus 4 days then, right? Let's go back to the actuals now and say, what did that shake out to? And so Teja, talk to me about that.
I think it doesn't look as all bad as what we saw compared to the hypothesis, right? As much as we saw reds there, right? We still saw a lot more traffic relative to the 2 day, right? About a 1.4x there. yes, we did overspend, and I think we spent a lot more given that we assumed there'd be a lot more traffic, and so we had to spend towards that traffic, right? But with the help of the ASPs and the slight little change in total units that we saw, right? We did see an extra 17% in growth in sales as a result of it, but more so, it begs the matter of we kind of just paid to play to a certain extent, right? We paid to get that incremental traffic coming in, but given that the conversion rates weren't there, and if it weren't for the higher ASP, right, to everybody's, we would be spending more for about the same amount of traffic that we saw, right? So did we actually see the significant bump in traffic and sales that we'd expect given that it was a 4-day window? I think this is telling me not really, right? And any sort of love that we saw on a revenue or a top line perspective is because of the ASPs or the less discounting that was happening throughout that window, a margin of things there.
Yeah. Dennis, anything else you want to add on here?
Yeah, I think Teja hit all the key points there. I think the only other thing to add is if you were to take these numbers on aggregate, the way we're showing them here, the conclusion would be, well, they just should have spent less. And I think the real answer is obviously more nuanced than that. And we had to kind of take the analysis to one level deeper. To figure out kind of what's behind these, and is there still an angle here where brands can still deploy the same amount of ad spend but get more out of it, and I think we come away thinking that yes, there is an opportunity there as well, as we'll get into.
Well, I think that's interesting, right? Is that's a natural step for people to take here, is being like, well, we shouldn't have spent as much, right? We didn't get as much output from it, but right. To that effect, that you have to spend more to capture them, right? Right. The spending less doesn't mean things will get better, or rather, will you be more efficient? Maybe. But everybody is spending more. Spend is up as a whole, right? And so we're competing with everybody else. Right. And I think for those that leveraged audiences, and I talked about this earlier as well, I think you saw some more efficiency gains and probably saw some more campaigns performing well there, because we definitely did, especially targeting people who bought last year, for example, as well. But you get efficiencies from your tactics, not from necessarily and how you deploy your spend, not necessarily on the spend as an overall. Right. And so I think the ad costs definitely increased disproportionately. We're competing for the same set of shoppers, but really our margin took a bit of a hit, right? We might have been more profitable, but having like that 3-point kind of change in tacos there definitely decreased our efficiency. But it is a bit of a flag for us to look at and think about as we continue to evolve our in this new world of 4-day Prime days as well. So. I do believe that, and you guys tell me what you think, but I think it was a longer event, but it was actually harder as a result.
Yeah.
Disagree?
I agree. I think it's because we don't know how to react to the buyer pattern, right? We don't know what those trends are going to necessarily look like. Are they going to buy in the front? Are they going to buy in the back? Are they even going to buy during the middle? Or how is that all going to play out, right? So I was talking to a lot of the brands throughout that window, and a lot of it were starting to give up after day 2, right? They were saying, well, I was expecting my front half to be significantly higher than what I expected. Now that wasn't actually happening out. So why even spend going into the back half, right? Yeah. And so a lot of brands, and some were pivoting and reducing their spends going into the back half, versus others were doing it differently, right? They were sticking it through, right? So it actually separated the brands who could afford to withstand it and push through were continuing to do it, and they probably reaped some benefits off of that. Brands who were kind of going against the hypothesis and saying, well, I'm not seeing it, and they kind of gave up, right? They lost a bit of volume there as a potential missed opportunity as well.
Yeah, and so let's actually look at the total sales then, right? 2024, this follows a very similar pattern for all tentpoles, right? Yeah. You get a peak, and then it comes down the other end. And so this isn't unique to Prime Day. This is how every tentpole normally functions. I think that, I'm going to go to the next one here because I don't even want to stop here. But this was an interesting change for how tent poles normally perform across a large sample set of data, right? There is arguably you can offset that middle dip and say, yeah, okay, fine, it peaked. And you kind of have that stretch there if you had a trend line going through it. But that's a pretty big drop. Like we saw that kind of drop if we look at the hour by hour data coming into the back half of the first day in 2024 versus in that 2-day tent pole versus in this 4-day tent pole. We saw it over 2 days, right? And so tell me if I'm wrong here, but I remember when we looked at the 2024 data and the hourly one, you see a very similar pattern over the 2 days. Now we're just seeing that stretched over 4, no?
Absolutely.
Exactly. But also with that notable bump again at the tail end of the event window, and the only other times that we're seeing that type of characteristic is when some other similar kind of longer event windows like the BFCMs, where we start to see some signature of that, and so this is starting to be now starting to look like a recurring pattern. That really speaks to what we think is kind of the shopper behavior during these extended windows, wherein they're probably doing a lot of window shopping leading into the event, prior to the event window, making their kind of pre-planning their purchase decisions, if you will. That kind of speaks to that early peak that we see on day one, and we've seen that time and time again on all tentpole events. But then there's a consolidation that seems to be materializing here through the remainder of the window, where they take a step back. Traffic counts are still really high. There's a lot of traffic activity in those days 2 and 3 periods, and then they come back and make another wave of purchase at the right at the tail end of the event window. And so it's becoming a measurable, repeatable peak here that we're starting to see at some of these events.
Yeah. Go ahead, Teja.
One thing I was just going to add there, right, is the importance of that second peak that we're seeing that I don't think a lot of people expected, right? That first peak is equivalent to your day one from last year. And day 2 and 3 here, you take the sum of those 2 days, that's your day 2 of what you saw in a last year peak, right? So now those cover everything that you would typically see in your usual prime. And there's that day 4 where arguably it's as impactful and as powerful as your day 1 here. And arguably even more, given that the data is being stretched, the days are being stretched, people have more time to make decisions, right? They're going to buy the ones that they want, but then also what else can they buy? There's more, given the assumption that it's longer days, they can assume more deals, more products, more discounts. So what else can they get, right? And I think it's the ability to capitalize on that, especially I think going into next year's prime. I'm assuming it's going to be a 4-day window, right? The way I would approach and the strategies I would deploy are going to be completely different to what I was doing on a 2-day prime.
Now, I think that to the effect that, right, 4 days, BFCM is actually a 4-day tentpole event. We see similar kind of patterns across that. But I think and we've talked a lot about the actual duration of Prime Day from the 1st to the 4th, but even the lead in and lead out were drastically different. Right, like it wasn't the same, slight elevation and then a really big kind of curve all around, like what you normally see from tentpole events, and they're called tentpoles because they look like a tent. This was a steady increase on the lead in, and a higher increase rate versus the previous years, and even on the lead out, like all of a sudden we have like it kind of comes down and picks back up again before it drops quite extensively on 14th. What like, I don't get it. I don't get this lead out. I don't get this lead in as much, especially when we start thinking about that 4th of July weekend, and when we're all sitting outside and barbecuing, and we're all enjoying a cold one with the family, and there was a higher growth rate on that lead in. What happened? A higher number of sales. Talk to me, guys. I don't get it.
I think you said it there, right? Especially in that lead in, July 4th afterwards, right? It's that, okay, I actually need to look, Prime Day's coming up, what needs to happen, what should I buy? So you saw that steep incline towards it, given that it was more so at the start of the year, start of the month per se. And then the lead out more so is, I think it was going into the weekend, right? It was Tuesday to Friday. And so going into the weekend, now it's all the people who didn't buy during the weekday, all who's busy in their 9 to 5 grind, right? Is what else is bottom left? Like what are all the little scrappy discounts that are left there that I can buy? And so going into the weekend, I think it's your typical weekend bump that you would generally see across any of the brands is what happened there, right? So I think the timing was the biggest thing. Is it impacted the lead in, the way the 4-day played out, and also impacted the lead out relative to what we typically saw.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough, right? It makes it's I know I definitely was one of those people that bought on the 14th. And got when you miss the Prime Day window, you still want to buy something and you led up to it. As a shopper, I know I fell into the common trope, and which is why we have lead out campaigns, which is why we continue to spend. And I definitely was like out to that. Did I pay more? Yes, but it didn't change the want or the desire to have this product, right? And it was a mirror for everyone paying attention here. And so it didn't change the desire. And so I was like, you know what, I'm buying it anyways, even though I missed it. Right? It's I really did want this. I built up to buying this over that time. So it's an interesting time, like BFCM correlations here as well. It's an interesting perspective. It's an interesting approach that we've actually been able to see here, or how things played out. To both of your points, what the strategy is for next year and how we look at Prime Days in the future. As much as every brand that we looked at came in with a very similar strategy from last year, a similar approach to a 2-day window, that needs to change, right? These sales numbers, how we look at that, how we plan for it, our deals coming in, coming out, can we capture some of those buyers, even if they're sitting on based on this data, they're all sitting outside and having a barbecue or wherever they're doing for that July 4th weekend and scrolling, right? Looking at what they want to buy and actually pulling the trigger. So as we keep going down this path here, Jen's talked to me like the traffic. This was really, really interesting in comparing not only the sessions but the conversion rates over time from that and overlaying that 2-day and 4-day window. What do we see here? Teja, I'll throw to you first. This looks like overly complex, but it was super simple when we put it together. What am I looking at here? What am I seeing here, Teja?
I think here is like, especially like what you see is similar to your sales kind of graphs that we were looking at, right? Going into the lead in of last year, right? Day one, huge spike of sessions coming in and traffic, right? There wasn't a lot of built-in lead-in time for people to go and buy. It was all the people needed to buy on day one. There's a sense of urgency to their purchases that need to have happened between a day one and a day two of their window. Versus this year, right? I think a lot of the people did in that steep incline of traffic that we saw, right? People were doing all the window shopping. They were looking, they were starting to buy some preliminary options. But a lot of the people on day one had high session counts, right? They had low session counts, but they had high purchase intent. They were ready to buy. They knew what they wanted to buy, right? So brands, for the most part, were getting just more revenue per user, per conversion or whatnot, right? People had everything built up. And then as you went into, I think, the remaining days of Prime, right, it was more so, okay, what else can I buy, right? So it was more window shopping, more adding to carts, and then starting to buy the products that they need and starting to increase their basket sizes over a period of time.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's that 2-day, looking at that dark purple one in the background there, that big jump on the first day. Right, that was one of our hypotheses that would stay the same. Right, I think we saw that from a sales perspective, but from a traffic perspective, that didn't happen. Like people were more focused on what they wanted to buy. It seems.
I think they were figuring out what they wanted to buy on day one as they were making the purchase. Whereas this year, it looks as though, as Teja was pointing out, that it looks like by and large they were much more prepared, and it was just about coming in on day one and pulling the trigger. And we see that with the really high conversion numbers that we saw on day one. But then you see that kind of that step back playing out, on the 2025 data, showing them increasing session counts again on day two, figuring out maybe what their next purchase is going to be, not necessarily pulling the trigger right then and there, doing a little bit of homework, a little bit of browsing, leading up to a purchase bump that we saw there on day 4 on the other graph. Whereas last year, peak session and conversions day 1, and then a drop and a last bump of purchases as the deal windows were closing off. So slightly different buyer trends here in the 2 years for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Like we still have a bit of a kind of like, if we look at the July 12th and then kind of that July 10th. And for those keeping track at home, these dates are the 2025 dates, but the 2024 dates are actually the Prime Day dates that we're overlaying behind it. But if we look at that July 10th from last year, which would have been insert day after Prime Day, that peak and that July 12th peak that we see are arguably similar, right? People still came back to start looking again and making sure that they're getting what they're getting something or looking for the things that they're wanted to buy and still want to buy something there. And so that definitely is interesting. Obviously, we see the drop in conversion rates in 2025 as a higher drop. Right. And so a higher drop meaning, a lower conversion rate than we did see in 2024. Right. It was pretty consistent as we got that lead out. And so I think the 4 days played a role in that, right? That people, as much as that they were looking, they actually bought less because they had more time to buy during.
Exactly. And we also see that kind of lowering of the peaks and stretching out the window into the 4-day event this year as compared to the concentration of traffic and sales last year into the 2 days. Again, I think with more time, the shopper was able to maybe go a little bit more casually, a little bit more thoughtfully in their purchase decisions through the window, rather than there might have been a bit of a missing element of urgency there that was there a year ago in a tight 2-day window.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. It still kind of feels like it behaves like from a consumer psychology perspective. It still does feel like that 1-day event, like that 1 day is going to drive a big portion of the engagement, right? And people are coming into that.
A lot of
more days. Go ahead, Teja.
I was going to just add is that excitement wasn't there as much, right?
Yeah.
It's Prime Day, I got to buy something. There's going to be great deals, and I need to buy it because it's like Dennis said, the urgency, right? It's only 2 days versus giving it 4 days. It's more relaxed, right? I'm not as stressed. I'm not as looking and buying at the same time. I have more time to look and drag out my buying decision before I actually go and pull the trigger, right? And I think that is evident across all the data that we're looking at.
Yeah, and that's an interesting piece there, right? And I think we see that through the conversion rates, right? That average that we looked at, it was 16 to 14, right? And or actually even different than that, but there was a drop in conversion rates. I think what the intent here was to drive more sales, and I know, as we all kind of always talk about Amazon, and yes, they win with more ad spend, but their goal was to help also to help brands, right? That there's more time to buy. But the inverse actually happened. There wasn't as many purchases, right? People were like, well, I don't need to buy today. I can buy tomorrow. Then the next day they forget about it, right? Like to be honest, that's what happened to us. I looked on Monday, Tuesday, or the Tuesday, Wednesday for the mirror, and I was like, okay, cool. It's on sale. Let me still shop around a bit more. And then I completely forgot about it and ended up buying after as a result. But I didn't have this sense of like, I need to buy this now because there's no more time for me to get it.
Right. But to play devil's advocate, on the flip side of that, sales were up. It's not that sales were down. It's not that brands sold less. They sold more, but the efficiencies definitely took a hit, right? Whether it's you look at it from price per user, conversions per user, conversions per session, conversions per ad spend. On any one of those efficiency metrics, they were all down, and that kind of comes back to that more thought out, slower pace, more relaxed purchase journey that shoppers were taking this year compared to last.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, look, gents, we've been going at it here for 40 minutes. We have a lot of insights I know that we wanted to talk through. Let's lock in here onto the back end a little bit. And I know at this point, we've dispelled a lot of these hypotheses, right? We didn't get that same linear 2x increase, higher ASP. We actually thought ASPs would stay relative, like higher ASPs with less discounts. we saw how that shook out as well. And then also coming into that third hypothesis, which was the day one peak, right? Which we saw something similar play out too, less from a traffic perspective, but more so from that sales perspective, still skyrocketing. And so when we look at how they reacted at the beginning here, what we're kind of like, these are kind of, let's go with the early trends that we saw. Right. I think we all saw this play out. Sales surged early, but stayed engaged throughout. Right. We saw that kind of little bit of a dip, but it was there. And buying intent was definitely the strongest at the start. Right. The last part here, though, I know, talk to me about this one. The multi-day shopping habits were clear.
I think there as much as we saw like the high purchase intent on day one, right? We see that in the sales perspective, right? That day one excitement was there, right? It drove the highest sales on that day. But if you still look at your day two and day three sales, it's still a 2-3x in terms of above what your daily averages would look like. Right. So I think it still allowed and attracted more browsing to happen, more deal chasing and finding products that are on discounts. And that it allowed them at the start was super high. But going into that multi-day shopping habits, right, we can see that, okay, I'm going to buy it. I found myself doing this, right? I bought all the ones that I really cared for on day one. Now, throughout the day, as I was going and I was doing gardening and whatnot, being outside, I'm like, okay, I need this tool, I need that tool. And I go and I just find all the ones that are still on deals and discounts, and I'm buying them. Right. So going in, I expected to buy 1 or 2 things, and I ended up buying 10 things by the end of Prime. Right. And so a lot of that multi-day shopping habits happen. And we can also see that in a bit of the AOVs. Right. Yeah. And in terms of me adding more and increasing my basket sizes there. And so I think that also helped a lot of the brands get that incremental sales as a result.
Yeah. And for those of you keeping track, if Teja went from buying 2 items to buying 10, that's the shopper you want. If you are interested in other things he likes to buy, let me know. And you can always chat with him about it and think about what your strategy would be for next year as well. But I love shoppers like you, Teja. I want you to buy it all. And so as we go into the middle part of the event, I know we hit the front. What did we see as we start looking at this? What did we actually see here in terms of the mid event? You mentioned this here, Teja. I'm actually going to throw this over to you, Dennis. AOV started going up in the middle of the event?
Yeah. So we started to see, again, right back to that consolidation that took place on day 2. We just saw AOVs on average climbing incrementally through the remainder of the window and into the early part of the lead out even. So I think that is possibly a combination of shoppers kind of leaning in, to Teja's point, and increasing their basket sizes and just buying more product as they had more time to think about it. Possibly also with some moves on the seller side as far as their discounting and their price points and just trying to grab some additional margin there towards the tail end of the window.
Yeah, and I think that does tell nicely kind of the second part here that we saw as well, right? The efficiency drops. Right. It ad spend conversion really kind of started dipping on the final day. Late shoppers were still really buying, but they required more spend to convert. Right. And so that first kind of initial purview of the data, I was like, well, they could have spent less and done that, but we needed to maintain those ad spends to even get those conversions.
And we think maybe even spent differently, right? I think what we found was that the advertisers were taking a bit of a simplistic approach of just kind of more or less deploying the same levels of investments across all the ad products without necessarily recognizing that change in buyer behavior that was going to play out over the window. And we think there's opportunities there to do a little better on where they deploy that spend and how to get the most out of it.
Like I know we're already evolving our playbooks as it comes into Prime Day for next year. But for you've heard it multiple times. I'm going to keep saying it again. Audiences reign king to help you drive more efficiency. Especially during this Prime Day. Like, you look at the vigorous head nods from both Denis and Teja here. They saw a lot of wins throughout that. So as we keep going here, Denis, that last part here, what really shook out in this post-event kind of interest, that post-event interest here?
Yeah, we saw a nice follow through there into the lead out, and again, I think there's maybe a couple of things going on there. There's always a tailwind that comes out of any of the tentpole events. So the fact that those few days after the event were up is not entirely surprising. The extent at which they stayed up, I think, was the more interesting bit. Part of that might have been the weekend effect rolling right into a weekend, perhaps gave some additional boost there. But was it also an effect of some follow through deals and shoppers just being generally more engaged through an extended window? I think is our current hypothesis there.
Yeah. So now let's give away some of the keys here. So we know our hypothesis. Some of them shook out, some of them didn't. We saw how the performance shook out between and during. If we wanted to give away some tidbits for next year, as people kind of start thinking about, I know everyone. If you haven't done a debrief post Prime Day, you probably should. This is the best time to think about what your strategy is for next year. Right? It's fresh. It's current. Look at your data. Understand it. How did your best sellers move? How did the rest of your catalog move? How did your deals perform? This is the best time to do it, which is why we're giving everyone a bit of a sneak peek and a bit of a tidbit here around how does this shape our playbook now for next year? And I think the best place to start on that is to look at the difference here between spend on the sponsored product, sponsored brand, and sponsored display side. One thing to note on this graph here, as before I let Denis and Teja jump in here, and there are two axes, right? Because there is always a higher spend on sponsored products. So sponsored product axis is anchored towards the left side, whereas the sponsored brand and sponsored display is anchored towards the right side. And so I'm assuming you can see my right and left in the same, but this side is the anchoring for sponsored brand and sponsored display to really showcase the differences here. But Denis, thrown over to you.
Yeah, so I think here the opportunity is around, again, playing. It's all about aligning the ad strategy to what that buyer behavior is, and of course, it's incredibly difficult to predict what that was going to be leading in. We have the benefit now of hindsight, and in future kind of extended Prime Day windows, we think there's an opportunity here to take advantage of maybe some patterns that we're starting to see. And so that is, that initial purchase wave plays out on day one. That's to be expected, and I think the advertisers are fairly well attuned to that now. But it's that kind of stepping back, that reconsolidation that the shopper's doing, browsing around, leading to that very measurable bump again at the tail end of the event. And I think advertising strategies can be adjusted ever so slightly to better align to that. And so what we would recommend is that advertisers take advantage of that kind of more mid-funnel type of shopping behavior that's playing out on days 2 and 3 with appropriate ad vehicles there. That's largely driven off of sponsored display, a heavier investment on sponsored display up front. Also with some sponsored brand in there could be helpful. But keeping some powder in the keg on the sponsored product side for that last day where bottom of funnel is going to play an absolutely key role. So keeping some budget available and leaning into that last day with some increased sponsored product investment, we think would likely yield kind of a more efficient outcome in terms of ad spend. Anything else to on that?
I think it's just kind of doubling down. We know that day 4 is that extra value, right? That's where you get those incremental sales that you can see. And it's a matter of, well, can I actually front load my remarketing spend during the start, right? Especially if I look at that SD line, I should remarket. And to Ali's point, as the AMC guy within the organization here, right, is it put those audiences in place, right? People who are adding to carts but still haven't purchased, or who's been looking at this over a 7-day window or 14-day window, right? Get those lookalikes, or even identify the people like me who already bought from your brand once or twice already during this event. But now you have complementary products or supplementary products that could also be a part of this basket. Right now, put all of those in and you're building in. And so now that 4th day where that sense of urgency somewhat comes back, given that it's your last day of major discounts, right? You're going to see that surge of sales coming in. And so to Denis's point, you have that bottom of the funnel SP there to not convert all the awareness building and remarketing that you've been doing between those SD and brand ads.
Yeah, the strategy does need to evolve, and I think there's a point made earlier there as well. It's actually very similar to how we think about BFCM, right? There are a lot of similarities there, but there are nuances that are unique to Prime Day and the element of this too. So, making sure you hit your remarketing, making sure you actually get that brand ahead as well when you want to win against that competitive shelf too. And again, you can never forget about your sponsored product, but a full funnel approach is always the game. Overlay that with some audiences, make sure you're remarketing effectively towards the people that have engaged with you. That's going to be your truest sense of a win. And you can apply a lot of what I said across the board all the time, but it becomes more imperative, more prudent, and more relevant during a tentpole event because of the increased eyeballs, because of the fact that people are going to spend more, and because of the fact that you want to capture those people at that time, right? And not lose out on them. So, guys, fundamentally, did it drive real value or extend the same performance? Right? Did we just stretch the same performance over 4 days, or did we get more out of this? And I think both of you have a perspective here, and in the truest fashion of every single time the three of us are on a webinar. Who was yes, Denis or Teja?
I think yes as well.
Oh, both of you were yes. Okay.
Yes, but I think it depends. I think yes to some of the brands I talked to, no to some of the other brands I talked to. So it just depends who I was talking to.
Okay, so as long as your ad strategy followed the behavior that the shoppers showed, and you had a bit of premonition that shoppers weren't going to be the same like last year to this year, you actually got more lift, right? It was a better time period there. Okay, but then we also have a no, right? And I think this was probably more. We saw a lot more of the no than we did see the yes. And Denis, I'll poke to you on this one. Why no?
Yeah, I think it's how this year played out. By and large, was there wasn't as much of a lift as maybe brands were hoping. But as we all know, hope is not the greatest plan, right? So I think when we looked at this question, the reason I raised my hand on the yes is in terms of, was the opportunity there? I believe the opportunity was there. Did everyone convert on that opportunity? No, definitely not. And it all comes down to exactly the point that Teja made earlier around aligning kind of their ad strategy, their discounting strategy to the change in shopper behavior that comes with a longer time window. Right, simple as that.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people looked at it in that way. I think all three of us are. There's such a big opportunity with 4 more days. I think we all believe that to be true. I think that there's as we kind of see these no's and or if you treated them all the same, it's not going to play out. And I think the line that you use there, Denis, is apt, right? Hope is not a strategy. It's just not, right? And so if we went in there hoping that we'd be able to get those 2x or do more of the same, right? It's not the way it needs to be. I think that as we continue down this path here, it's a matter of thinking about how do we sequence our promotions a bit better, right? How do we create urgency? Because now these 4 days are actually doing the opposite, right? How do we re-engage shoppers, right? As we looked at those various different ad types. And so extending Prime Day doesn't automatically extend performance without that intentionality, without capitalizing on what these opportunities are, without spending the time to understand that this is what's going to play out. And now that you have this information, look at your own data, right? Look at your own data, look at your own, whether it be segmenting it through your product catalog or looking at the entire catalog as well, that you'll see and analyze for yourself that there was uplift, right? It just wasn't a straight uplift that we would have expected from 2 to 4 days, right? But you have these insights, you have what we've given you here as well. Start crafting and thinking about what should our sequence be for our promotions? How should we think about our advertising strategy for next year as well, right? And so uplift was real, not as big as we thought it would be from a 2 to 4 day jump, as you would normally hope to expect. And really so then that means to us, more days does not equal more of the same. Right. And so stretching Prime Day definitely does require an intentional strategy around pacing, not just making sure you have enough budget to hit 4 days. Right. And that's going to be the biggest takeaway for us. Closing thoughts from each of you. We are well over what we thought we were going to do here. Teja, hit us with your closing thought, and then we'll go up to Dennis.
I think it's like you said, not just having the money to spend during those 4 days, but how to spend that money and being tactical about it. And arguably, you could probably spend less and still capture more sales as long as we have the right strategies in place.
Ooh, I like the bullish approach towards that. Dennis, talk to us. You are I always believe you're the level-headed guy out of the two of you. But talk to me. What do you think, Dennis?
It was exciting to look back on how things played out and to see that kind of this kind of reinforcing pattern that we're starting to see emerge out of these longer deal events. I think there's something here that can be built on systematically for brands. Hopefully, you got some good some good tips out of what we shared here today. I think there's certainly, and we're continuing to learn as well every year that these events are playing out. We're honing our tactics and our learnings based on those look backs. And applying them in the events to come, and that's what's exciting here. It's a dynamic environment.
It's a dynamic environment. Dynamic by nature. That should be our tagline or our rap name. But everything is dynamic, right? And I think that's the element that we always think about, and as us at Trellis, how we think about data. And how we evolve continuing going forward, right? So past performance does not indicate future results. Hope is not a strategy. Think about your Prime Day for next year. Think about your strategy. Get those debriefs in. Talk to the team. Think about how you're going to approach those 4 days for next year, because it's going to be super, super impactful. Don't be the people that just get extended over you get the same performance from the 2 days over the 4 days. Be the group of people that actually got a significant lift from doing it the right way, thinking about it the right way, and leveraging your audiences, your ad strategy, your pricing strategy, and your promotional strategy accordingly too. On behalf of myself, Denis, Teja, thank you all so much. Denis, Teja, thank you guys for putting this together. Thank you for thinking through the data sets here. Thank you for always empowering our brands. For everyone else, more and more to come. Our data sets are strong. Our opinions are loud, and we at Trellis love what we do. So have a great day. Enjoy the rest of Tuesday, and we'll see you all soon.
Take care, everyone.